Right, it is now 7 p.m. And so I think we should try to start on time as much as possible. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our discussion, Black in Comics and the Significance of Black Panther. This roundtable discussion is a part of the annual Blue Flamingo Literary Festival hosted at the University of the Bahamas. Now in its fourth year, the aim of the festival is to promote reading, writing, and literary arts within the Bahamas. By reaching out to local, regional, and international partners, the Blue Flamingo Literary Festival hopes to create a space for developing, highlighting, and encouraging a thriving Bahamian literary culture. The Blue Flamingo Literary Festival includes poetry readings, book launches, panel discussions, writing workshops, live stage music and spoken word performances, writing and poetry contests, as well as activities specifically targeted towards the youth. Now, this year's main festival, which was scheduled for March, was canceled due to the national lockdown resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the committee decided to move forward with several events that could be facilitated in an online modality. We scheduled 3 events, last month's Bahamian Folklore as inspiration for contemporary cultural productions, this evening's Black in Comics and the Significance of Black Panther, and next month we'll be hosting poetry during the pandemic. That is another discussion that will be in November 20th. So please look out for that as well. Now, before we move forward, I'd like to recognize the committee members of the Blue Flamingo Literary Festival for all their hard work in organizing these events. They are Dr. Marie Searsing, who is our co-host this evening, Dr. Dustin Helberg, Dr. Saskia First, and Professor Ivy Higgins. I would also like to thank the Chair of School of English, Dr. Mayuri Dika, and the Dean of Faculty in Liberal and Fine Arts, Dr. Douglas Barkey, for their continued support of the Blue Flamingo Literary Festival initiative. A few housekeeping tips. We would ask our audience to write all questions in the chat. These will be monitored by the committee, who will present the questions to the guest speakers during the Q&A session. And now I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. First, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Dr. Frank Walker. Frank Walker is the first African-American writer to be named Kentucky Poet Laureate. Dr. Walker has published 8 collections of poetry, including Turn Me Loose, The Unghosting of Medgar Evers, which was awarded the 2014 NAACP Image Award for Poetry, and the Black Caucus American Library Association Honors Award for Poetry. He is also the author of Buffalo Dance, The Journey of York, winner of the 2004 Lillian Smith Book Awards, and Isaac Murphy, I Dedicate This Ride, which he adapted for stage, earning him the Paul Grain Foundation Playwrights Fellowship Award. His poetry was also dramatized for the 2016 Contemporary American Theater Festival in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, and staged by Message Theater for the 2015 Breeders' Cup Festival. A lover of comics, Walker curated We Wear the Mask, Black Superheroes Through the Ages, an exhibit of his personal collection of action figures, comics, and related memorabilia at the Lyric Theater and Cultural Arts Center in 2015. Dr. Walker, can you just say hello to the people, please?
Hello to the people, please.
Next, we have Arthel Isom. He is a background artist, director, and art director for the first and foremost CEO of Tokyo-based animation studio, Dart Shitagio. I'm sure I messed that up, but I'm sure he'll correct it. Arthel has lived in Japan for 15 years and has spent his time extensively studying and or working in Japanese animation industry. Isom began his career as a background artist in Oguru Kobu, founded by the art director of Ghost in the Shell and Professional Inspiration, and since has worked on a number of animated related shorts, features, films, and everything in between. Arthel's journey to success has been intensive, challenging, him to evolve and grow within his craft to inspire and lead others. Mr. Isom, can you say hello, please, sir?
Hello, everyone.
And thank
Yeah,
you
I guess
so much. I know it's extremely early for you, so thank you for joining us.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right.
I guess I'll just correct the name of our studio real quick. Yeah, it's just De Art Stagio. Yeah, it's the hardest thing in the world to say. I apologize for that.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, next we have Kiana Whitted, is Professor of English and African American Studies at the University of South Carolina and Director of the African American Studies Program, a graduate of Hampton University with a PhD from Yale University. Her research and teaching focuses on 20th century Black literary and cultural studies and American comics and graphic novels. She is the author of the Eisner Award-winning book, EC Comics, Race, Shock, and Social Protest, and co-editor of the collection on comics and the US South. She is also the co-editor of Inks, the Journal of the Comic Studies Society, and chair of the International Comic Arts Forum. On the web, she can be found at her email address. I don't know why I read that off, but Kiara, are you here? Can you say hello, please?
Hi, Craig, I'm here. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. And next we have Maz Joshin. He is a Haitian Bahamian comic books artist, animator, and illustrator. Best known as the creator of his comic book series Supernova and Canyon. Maz is the founder of the illustration and production studio Steaming Kettle. Currently, Maz heads the Bahamas' first animated series, Nassau Rock, which for which he's the chief co-founder. Maz, would you say hello, please?
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And finally, we have Cameron Johnson. He is a 2D animator and illustrator born in Nassau, Bahamas, fascinated with how comics and animation can convey enchanting stories. He is driven to create works that inspires others in the same way. Folklore is a major theme he explores in these works, seeking to create his own as well as reinvent how cultural storytelling is interpreted through visual arts. After completing his Associates of Arts at the University of the Bahamas, he decided to pursue a career in animation, leading him to study at Sheridan College in Canada. While abroad, he has gained a great appreciation for culture and the art form. Now a graduate, Cameron has gained industry experience working on hit shows such as Wild Kratts and the award-winning student film Pork Strips. He currently works at Tonic DNA, an animation studio based in Montreal, Quebec. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that is, I'm sorry, Cameron, please say hello to everyone, please.
All right, hello everyone, and thanks, Greg. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, awesome. It is so great to see all of you and to have you all here. For the conversation, we will have Dr. Walker will monitor the conversation. And as I'd ask you all to, speak for a few minutes first, and then you can get into conversation. But at this time, I will turn it over to Dr. Walker.
Thanks, Craig, Dr. Smith. This is an amazing opportunity. I'm looking at my screen, and I teach full-time here in Kentucky, and my screen never looks like this. You can imagine why. The thing that I'm most impressed about is that we're having an international conversation about a subject or industry that 10, 20, 25 years ago, we were almost absent from, it seemed like. And I would ask that each of you open up with talking about, you're coming into the industry, whenever that was for you, either making a conscious decision to enter as a professional or preparing for it just by what you did when you were young. I'm really interested in your entry because we have collectors, we have owners, we have artists, we have scholars present. And so we all come from different directions, but I think collectively we are the industry. Dr. Whitted, would you start us off?
I'd be happy to. So we're talking origin stories. And oh, you have my, oh, very nice. Thank you. Nice to see my book there. Okay. Oh, thank you. Very nice. So I'd be happy to talk a little bit about how I got into this. I am the type of comic book reader that hasn't been, reading X-Men since I was 5. I grew up with newspaper comic strips and Garfield, and I loved Mad Magazine. But for me, my entry into this work really happened around the time I was in college. So when I was in Hampton, and I always enjoyed a lot of different types of genres like horror and science fiction and all those types of things, and went into a comic book shop near campus and decided to take a look at what some of the comics were doing these days. And at that time, this is gonna date me, this was 90s, the early 90s, and Image was getting started. And so I picked up the first issue of Spawn, for those of you who know that character. And it amazed me that it had the kind of storytelling that I liked. So in terms of the genre, it was like a superhero story, but it was also a horror story. And the main character happened to be Black. And so I started reading a lot of different types of comics around that time, but that is especially memorable to me because I wasn't sure I would feel welcome in that comic book store. And some of those stories made that happen. So I started reading comics just in my own time then, and my research is in African American literature, fiction, mostly 20th century. When I got the job here at the University of South Carolina, I was given the opportunity to teach a class on comics. And that was in 2003, 2004, 2005. And it started to get to the point where I was teaching that class every year. And I realized that some of the things that interested me about African American literature and the writers who interested me, Ralph Ellison, Richard Wright, Toni Morrison, a lot of some of the same things I was interested in about those books, I could also see working through comics. And so just to wrap this up, in the last several years, my interest has turned more to an earlier period of the comic book industry in the 1940s and 50s. And for me, it's a great pleasure to be able to research the ways that Blackness is represented during this period, but also to find African American creators during this period who are doing this work as well. So, so that's sort of my entryway into all of this work.
All right, I'm anxious to talk about your class, but we'll come back to that. Maz, talk about your entry.
I think Maz is muted.
Oh, hold on.
Maz, could you unmute yourself? Touch it again.
Still muted.
Maz, okay, there you go.
Am I good? Okay.
Okay, you're good.
All right, I'm good. But yeah, I was saying like most people like kind of started in high school just reading comic books, and I got at first it was just kind of like well, these are characters I like, these are things I like to draw. And then I think when I was in about the 11th grade, I had an art teacher. She asked me a very important question because at the time all my characters, they were Caucasian, and she asked me, why is it that I don't draw characters that look like me? I had never been asked that before, so it was almost like coming alive for the first time. And so it was just like understanding what that meant. And I remember saying to myself, like, why is it that my default was characters that didn't look like me? And so from that moment on, I decided I would want to write characters that kind of look like myself and, the world around me and stuff like that. And so I still get a lot of my inspiration from Japanese animation and manga and stuff like that, but it's just that it's been integrated with the things that I'm familiar with. And from that moment, it's kind of always just been that, continuously working towards perfecting that formula of making characters that look like myself, but with the quality of Japanese and Eastern animation and so on.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. And you're coming to us from Nassau, is that correct?
Yes.
And Dr. Whitted, you're in South Carolina right now?
Yes.
All right. I'm assuming we're going north if we're in Montreal. Cameron, are you in Montreal?
Yeah, I'm in Montreal right now. It's getting colder, so just keep me in mind once winter
Yeah.
hits.
You can have all that cold weather to yourself, but tell us about your entry.
So honestly, I was interested in hearing Maz's take because I would say mine's is very similar in that I've always been drawing from a young age. I would say I probably didn't watch any live action or always avoided live action shows until I was 16. It was all cartoons, all manga, and all comic books, but very few Western comic books. And so I found myself, as I started to get more serious with drawing and just delve into storytelling more, I found myself creating characters in places with appearances that I wasn't familiar with, and almost in a way removing myself from my own culture and what I am familiar with and trying to seek out things that I didn't know. So, you know, throughout high school and going into college back in the Bahamas, I was always attracted to making stories because I saw growing up just how influential they are in almost making me personally and other people the people that they are as they grow up and the way that they see things. And so it was 2016 when I finally came to Canada and I got exposed to so many other cultures. Part of it was homesickness, but it honestly made me really appreciate what I do know and where I do come from even more, and just the things about culture and tradition that I'm always so attracted to. So I guess to say is I've always been attracted to creating stories that go into imaginative worlds and explore things that maybe felt boring in real life, but could be made more interesting through drawings. But now having a better appreciation of just being a little more authentic and honest with myself. And right now I'm at a journey where I'm almost exploring that and honestly enjoying it quite a bit.
All right, thank you. Excellent. When I was a wee lad and dreaming about writers of color and artists of color, I could have never even imagined talking to an owner of a studio. So Arthel, when you jump in here, go backwards if you don't mind with your entry of in Jersey. Where's that artist, that love for art and anime? How was it born? What was it that sent you in that direction? And then we'll get to this amazing professional life you're having.
Okay, yeah, that was a long time ago. But, like so when I grew up in New Jersey, I think obviously like my career has gotten a total different path now, right? Look, I think all of you are kind of in writing and in comics still, but I'm in a totally different field, which is in anime. But I do remember when I was younger that we would often go to my aunt's house and uncle's house in New York, and they collected comics. And my first memory of at least a comic book that I think the first comic book that I was introduced with the first black character, it actually had a black character in it, and it was Cloak and Dagger. And that was the very first comic book I've ever read, actually. And so I and I still remember that, like, it meant a lot to me. So I went and got Cloak and Dagger #1, and then this was the first one that I actually read when I was younger, when Cloak and Dagger appeared in Spider-Man. But and I don't even know if at that time the fact that Cloak was like black, obviously, like, he was just kind of, I mean, I guess he, even though he was a side character with, or one of the starting characters with Dagger, he was still a main character in his own right within comics. And I don't know if when I was younger if that actually had an effect on me or not, like just kind of seeing a Black character. But I definitely identified with him, and I think that's why out of it just really stood out to me, because besides Cloak and Dagger, I wasn't really into reading comic books. And that was the only one that I ever really read. And whenever I would see Cloak and Dagger, I would always try to get it and read it more. But my brother and I, so I have a twin brother, we would always, I guess we would just try to create our own characters and things. We would just constantly draw and like find paper and whatnot to just kind of sketch on and create our own worlds and create our own characters. And similar to what like Maz said, like I don't know if we drew Black characters, or I don't even know what our characters were. I think they were always just like, although I guess we did. We tended to draw yeah, characters of color and character. I think they just kind of, we would always imagine these worlds where there was just like these Black characters fighting. Like we would watch something that inspired us, like we played Street Fighter or whatever when it first came out. But then all the characters, so then we decided to just make a fighting game. So we would just draw all the different characters that were in our game. And if we watched a Kung Fu flick or something that inspired us, then we would go and draw like a whole bunch of just fighters and things like that. But all the characters that we drew were always just like these Black characters. And we would come up with these different story arcs that kind of made up a reason why the characters in Africa or India or wherever we were drawing like did Kung Fu. But and I think that was kind of that's probably what got us into art, was because, you know, we were probably like a lot of us when we were younger, you know, kind of poor. So we didn't own like a Sega or Nintendo or anything, and we couldn't afford to go to the arcade center with all of our friends. But the occasional time that we did get treated to it, then we would just go back and just keep drawing and just kind of draw things. And I think that was like our escape and just a way to kind of have fun. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that was excellent, because I'm looking for those lines that we all cross at the same time. Coming from humble backgrounds, I think that by itself makes us naturally interested in heroic figures that we could afford, and comic books have always been inexpensive. As a kid, I had a milk crate full of comics. That was my book collection. We didn't have a television in our house, so those comic books were, you know, like encyclopedias to me, and so thin and ragged from being overworn. But the idea of creating our own characters, even as young people, that natural inclination to see yourself in the work that you're consuming, I think is natural no matter where we grow up or what our situation is. Dr. Whitted, when you think about representation, the thing about comics is, I think most people are familiar with how women have been portrayed in comics in general, you know, over-sexualized, almost like world in American history as an afterthought, and until recently. Could you talk a little bit about where you see women's place in this industry as characters, and how they're represented, and if you feel a particular, you know, allegiance or commitment to have an impact on that?
Certainly. Well, I mean, I would say that just like with what I said before about my work that I do on the earlier period of comics in the 40s and 50s, it's also true that women have always been a part of this industry on the page and behind the scenes. But as you say, some of those representations have been really problematic. And some of the work that I do during this earlier period, for instance, where there were boys and girls reading comics, men and women reading comics, you also had a prevalence of different types of genres, including teen comics, romance comics, along with the crime and horror and so forth. And women would be represented in all of those. But I think what we're seeing now more recently, obviously in the last few decades, are a lot more women creators who are being recognized and acknowledged for this work, allowed to, or not just allowed to, but taking the initiative to create their own characters. And I think it's important that we see that happening, not just in superhero comics, but even in a lot of science fiction comics and all different types. I have Lovecraft Country on the mind because the season just ended, and it's wonderful to see a girl who's a comic book reader in that story. It's a bit different from the book, but even the comics themselves were created by a woman cartoonist, Afua Richardson, who is doing some amazing work right now. So to be able to see that presence, to be able to see women who are have roles as writers, whether it's in Black Panther, as artists, even as editors, all of those roles are important.
Great, thank you for that. Arthel mentioned Cloak and Dagger, and I can help but think about the television series in the last, I think 3 years ago, there was a Cloak and Dagger series that earned 2 seasons on Netflix that was pretty decent. I always think as a writer, the book is always better than than whatever movie is created. Maz, or Maz, excuse me, when you think about seeing your favorite characters leave the page and then inhabit a space like a television screen or a movie screen, what characters have you been most excited about seeing on the regular television or on the big screen before we get to Black Panther? Before that even happened.
Well, I'm a little embarrassed to say, but I think the first character that really like jumped out to me, and I was like, oh, he's on the screen, was actually Harry Potter, because I grew up reading Harry Potter, and and I think I was 11. I think I was 11 or 12 when the first movie came out, and I was like, oh, he's gonna be on the big screen, and I remember seeing him on the big screen and seeing Hermione and Ron, and I was super excited about that. Just seeing characters that I've read come to life. It was I just remember being extremely like excited and almost overwhelmed almost.
No, I think that's a common experience. It's a very powerful thing to see something leave the page, I think, and be animated. We'll talk about the power of animation when we get back to Arthel, but Cameron, for you, what character has come out of a 2D space and inhabited a screen that had a powerful impact on you or really impacted you in a significant way?
To be honest, that's a bit of a harder one for me. It's so many that it's hard to pick one. If I really had to think really hard about it, I don't know why, but the first one that comes to mind is Catwoman. Now, the movie wasn't very good. I didn't like the movie very much, but I think that was the first time that I had seen this comic book character from a Western comic that, I don't know, I always really enjoyed seeing on the page, especially the dynamic with Batman. So I guess seeing her get her own spotlight for the first time, I don't know why, it just stood out to me. It wasn't the most, exciting way, but for some reason, that just played a role.
I can understand that. I guess it also depends on which Catwoman you got to see. I'm going to date myself and say that for me and my generation, there's only one Catwoman, and that was Eartha Kitt. And you can ask your grandparents about that. And as gorgeous as she may have looked in that suit, she wasn't a very good actor then. So when Halle Berry tried on the suit, it was rather disappointing for me because I expected so much more. Something akin to what Eartha Kitt did. She brought a kind of power to the role that was electric, and that she stole the screen every time she was on it. And that, to me, that's one of her best roles ever. Arthel, we're back to you. Why is animation so much more powerful than a comic book? What drew you to make that transition and to anchor yourself there. Arthur, you're still muted.
Mm-hmm. Sorry about that. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that anime is more powerful than comics, but I like, you know, the written medium or just written sources is this amazing thing. Like I still enjoy reading books and like I'm constantly reading, but at least with art, I think what drew me to anime was yeah, I think that was it, because more of, so I do enjoy writing, and then now we're exploring that more. But I also enjoyed, I guess, exploring art more, and so and not only and I guess so my field, like you mentioned earlier, or like Craig mentioned earlier, my study is a background painting, and I know that there's background artists for comic books, but I guess it was the environments within animation and film, like matte painting and things, that really drew me, just because they were just so believable, and it was just so inspiring. I think that particularly when I was younger, you know, the backgrounds in comic books weren't that detailed, and they weren't that, I mean, now they've come a long way, and you have some amazing technicians when it comes to background art in comic books now. But at that time, it was just like swatches of color and things like that. But anime in particular really, they really mastered, you know, using the environment to also tell a story, and to really add to. But it was like environments were a character in themselves, and I guess that is what drew me into the world of anime, actually, which is different than most people's entry into animation, and even into comic books. Like, most people love the characters, right? Like, you know, people like Spawn, or they like Panther, or they, you know, they're really drawn in by the characters. But I was drawn in just by the environment, and the possibilities, and what I felt was like the endless possibilities of being able to tell a story with environment.
Right. Well, and that's so important. I appreciate knowing that, you know, we have somebody out there doing that, taking care of the entire space. You know, what you describe reminds me of a landscape architect or a traditional architect, you know, who really focuses on space and how it's filled. Now, I know that my students, I also teach a comic book and graphic novel course. They pay almost no attention to the background. They put their story in a flat space. And the fact that it's all white space is an afterthought. They almost don't see it until somebody points it out, and ask them specific questions about, you know, what else is happening in that particular scene. Yeah, Dr. Whitted, to your class, I can imagine a time when, if you said out loud that you read comic books, people might tease you. There's a certain nerd factor that comes with this field. Maybe not so much if you can say that you're an illustrator, or you're an owner, or you're an artist, or you're a scholar. But if you're a collector, people think, you know, that's what you read, that's who you are, you're still a child. And even the growing use of graphic novel and comic book has added a kind of a purity and respect to the field of. Do you consider yourself a nerd in any degree, having grown up reading, you know, Mad and other books to this degree, or is it easy to keep it in the professional realm and kind of highbrow and so far away from what people would laugh at, because you got a doctorate and you get to talk about this stuff?
That's not where I thought you were going to go with that question, but I proudly embrace the nerd label. Yeah, I'm all of that, and I always have been. I think, you know, these things go in cycles. So every few years, someone puts out an article that says something like comics are growing up, or not just for kids, or something like that. And, you know, we see those cycles when they happen. People, whether it's within the comic books or different forms of media, embrace those characters in new ways. But yeah, no, I'm cool with that title. And I find that well, what I say to my students is they're all comics. So the term graphic novel is useful. You know, it does have a purpose, but they're all comics and we can all enjoy them. They can tell any story and, you know, do really innovative things. They are another form of storytelling. And so I'm not so much trying to sort of elevate it or make it any more serious or less serious than it is. But I think if you enjoy any types of storytelling of any category, there's something in comics for you.
Yes, thank you. I want to record that and play it back for all my critics.
The critics are there, but
yeah, they're gonna be there. Haters are always out there. I know we want to gradually turn this towards the direction of the Black Panther. You know, it's, you know, when I saw that in the title, when Craig sent it, you know, I was immediately, you know, hit with the idea that, you know, 2020 for me will always have a long line of negative reasons about this year that I won't be able to forget, including the passing of Chadwick Boseman. But I want to go to a warm spot, at least for me, starting with Cameron. I'm going to assume that all of us have seen the Black Panther on the big screen. And Cameron, starting with you, could you take us back to that moment? You know, you're waiting for it to happen. You haven't seen it yet. You've heard so much about it. What were you feeling? What did you experience? What was it like? What was the setting? Were you by yourself? Did you go with, you know, I took a whole class of students. Where did you watch it in Montreal? I'm curious about your experience the first time you saw the Black Panther.
So my opportunity to watch it was a lot more dragged out than I was hoping it would be. Because when it came out, I think what I felt more so than seeing that it got adapted to the movie was the reaction of everyone else around me to the movie. I'm probably mixing up some of the dates, but I remember when I went back home for the summer or around that time, there was a mall near my house, the Mall of Marathon back in Bahamas. And I just remember I was supposed to watch a movie or watch the movie with my friends, but the line from the ticket booth extended out to the entrance of the mall. So, and as we walked past the line, there were people saying, man, this is my third time watching the movie. And I'm here like, I haven't seen it yet. So I probably never saw people get that excited for a movie until it had happened. And so when I finally got to watch it, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, actually, with my aunt and cousins. We had watched it in the house. And we were just on the couch, we were watching the movie, and honestly, it blew me away. Just more so the costume design, honestly, and just the way that they were able to pull different elements from the various tribes in African countries and create something that felt so cohesive and so imaginative. So honestly, watching that movie, I felt very inspired in the same way, like I say, things do inspire me because it showed me that there's more ways to represent something and it's not just limited to the skin color of the character that's on the screen. So yeah, it blew me away, honestly, and I still think about a lot of the scenes even now.
Maz, what was your experience like seeing it for the first time?
Well, I remember when me and my friends went to see it, we all kind of like dressed up. I think some of us cosplayed. A few of us did, and a lot of us kind of wore like dashikis and stuff like that. Like we took a lot of photos and stuff like that. We were just all really excited to be a part of this kind of like cultural thing.
It kind of froze there for a second. You still with us?
So I remember like that being almost more important than the movie.
I think we have some Wi-Fi challenges on your end.
Yeah, I think there's some Wi-Fi issues.
So, like, sense of like that was the thing. It was the. But I remember like when I actually sat down, we were actually watching it. I think Am I breaking up here?
Yes, you get halfway through a sentence and it freezes up.
Okay. I don't know where it stopped, but yeah, I just remember like that first scene. When we saw it, we kind of like was just whispering to each other like, "Oh, this is good." And I always think about that. I always think about how just seeing characters in a location that kind of like resonated with us, and having us go in, "Oh wow, this is good." The movie didn't even reach like the 20-minute mark or anything, and we were just like excited. So I just
All right, we're gonna hope that gets better and move on to Arthel. I'm assuming you saw it in Japan.
remember that moment.
Yes, I saw it here in Japan. Actually, I watched it 4 times in the theater because so movies take forever to come to Japan. Like I don't even like it's like 6-7 months after they come out. But we really wanted to watch Black Panther. So all of my friends and things, we all got together. We went to one of the bases because the bases operate on the same time that America does. So we got one of our friends to let us on the base so we can go watch in the theaters on the base. And I just remember that of course the base theater was just packed, and everyone was just kind of some people were in cosplay. I think some of our friends were in cosplay, and and I think because we were watching the American news or the news on American TV, like just kind of trickling through on Japanese news and kind of watching reading things on the website. I think that was we had like a lot of anticipation, just kind of what was going on, like what was this movie going to be like, just because we would watch the news. Of course, being in Japan, the hype wasn't as big as it is in the States. In America, everybody had the dashikis on, and it was just like Black Panther fever. But in Japan, it was just like, oh, there's a movie coming out, and it was just really really mellow. But although the Japanese people in general were really excited to watch it, because even when I went to the theater for the second time, which was in the Japanese theater, all the Japanese had Black Panther costumes on, and like the whole thing. And I was like, it's crazy, even though they're Japanese, but they had the whole gear out, and so they were just as excited to watch it as well, and also just to participate in this whole like kind of cultural shift in I guess Black representation in media. And I think that was what stood out to me more than even just the movie itself and the event that it was. I was really interested, being in Asia, I was more interested in how the world perceived Black Panther. Like, of course, I'm Black, and so I was already like, okay, cool to hear the first Black hero is finally getting his first Black film, and so that was cool. Like, I understood that, but I kind of put that aside because I wanted to see how the world reacted to this. Would there be the same like vitriol, right? Because of course there's particularly within my industry, there's that the ideology that like Black films don't sell outside of America, or that like and other cultures and things. And so I wanted to see just kind of how true that was. Like, will Black Panther do well? So part of me was just kind of hoping that people brought tickets, like and went and watched the movie so that there'd be more of it. And so I was pleasantly surprised, because it was like all the theaters in Japan were just sold out, and people were just super excited to watch it. The Japanese people were in costume, and my Japanese friends as well. Like some of them had watched it like 4 or 5 times, and so I thought that was what stood out to me the most.
Right. I don't want to leave you out, Kiana. Were you in South Carolina when it happened for you? What was your experience like?
I was actually at a conference in Austin, Texas,
Okay.
with other comic scholars. So I said I wanted to get home to watch it, but I didn't want to wait. So me and a group of other comics nerds went out to the Alamo Draft House, and we watched it and got some commemorative cups and did the whole thing. It was cool to be with people who actually knew the comics a lot better than I did. And so they were breaking it down for me afterwards, and we were going through all of the scenes. And when I got back to South Carolina, that's when I saw it with my kids. And seeing it with my son, who was 6 at the time, was a completely different and wonderful experience for different reasons, because being able to see it through him and enjoy I mean, the quality of the production, the characters. I think it was sort of like what Cameron had said. You reach this point when you sort of look at each other and you're like, this is good. This is like, you're surprised, but just really overjoyed by it. So seeing it through my kids was especially nice.
Right. And it sounds like, Arthel, you had a similar experience that I did. You said you saw it 4 times in the first week.
Yes, actually, because I have different groups of friends, and so I would go. So yeah, it was pretty much the same week, and we would go watch it, or go watch it. So once I watched it twice in the same day, just because I would have to kind of watch it with just a different group, and each group was just as big. It was interesting. I was reading some of I was just kind of just reading the chats as we were talking, and one of the viewers said something that I thought was interesting. I think they watched it in Austria, but they had a similar experience, where because in Japan and like their experience, the whole audience is, I think in America, when all of you watched it, or in the Americas where you watched it, Caribbean, like the audience is all like full of people of color, but out here, like the whole audience is, just Asian, like more than like 80% of the audience is Asian, or 99%, right? And then there's like the few Black people or colored, or minorities that are have immigrated to Japan. So it was interesting to just get, like, each time I went a different time, like that never changed, except when I was on the base. Actually, in the base, there was a lot of Black people on the base, but so it was interesting to see everyone's reaction, just like how did the Japanese people react? What did they say when they came out the theater? Because I assume it was just totally different than how people were acting in America,
Yeah, I want to open up in general now. You don't have to, we won't go in a specific order. If you have something you want to jump in and say, but I'm real curious as to if your feeling about the movie and the people who made the movie changed as it seemed to get bigger. When you started to look around and the marketing part of it, in the Disney stores and cups and T-shirts and pillowcases and glasses and shoes and commercials, how did it? We've never seen that happen for a movie that featured people of color. Never, anywhere in the world. I don't imagine. Not at that scale. How did you respond to that? Was that shocking? Did it fill you up? Did you participate? I mean, the soundtrack.
I guess I'll kind of go first. I was actually really excited about it, and that did make me feel good. I think it was interesting because, like, obviously we're in this world we're in a time now where social media is prevalent in all of our lives, and so you go to Twitter, you go to Instagram, you go to social media channels to see how people are reacting to whatever event happens in the world. And of course, when Black Panther came out, there was kind of 2 reactions, right? Like there was the overall, most of it was overall positive, and there was the major reaction, just like, yeah, everyone was just really go for, like, Black Panther and everything that it stood for, like a Black representation on the screen, people participating. But of course, there was, you're always going to find like those, I don't know, the negative, like, what would you call it? I don't know, like toxic fans, because they were fans of the comics and things like that. But if a white person wore a Black Panther costume or something like that, there was actually some hate towards that, like, oh, why can't you let us have our own thing? And I actually had a different feeling. So I'm actually interested in how you all feel about that too, because I obviously, being in Japan, I was proud that white people and Asian people want to wear a Black costume. Like that seemed like amazing to me, that it wasn't like, oh, hey, that's just for Black people, or that here's a Black, like, like just like we like to dress up as Batman, and we like to dress up as Spider-Man. Like, cosplay is obviously massive in anime, and there are no Black characters, but I mean, there aren't that many characters of color. And so when when other nationalities and things were out there buying the cups and wanting to, get the, the folders and things like that, and for the film, and just really like celebrating what it is. Like in Japan, these things are always big. They come out for every movie that's there. But like seeing like another culture that has like nothing, especially Japan is so outside of the politics in America, and like so their experience, their viewing experience would be totally different than like than our experience and Black experience in America. Like how it just, because it would obviously it would mean something to us, and to them I think it was just a movie going experience, but that they were just willing to participate with it with that same fervor that we were participating meant a lot to me.
Frank, Frank, I want to clarify what you're asking. Were you talking more so about the advertising that came after the movie, or I guess like the public reaction, like what they thought, or just open to it?
Right. Yeah, all of it. Anywhere you see it, because most movies come and they're big and they happen and then they're over.
Right.
Black Panther happened and it kept happening and happening and happening and happening. And at some point, wherever you looked, there was something connected to it. There TV shows, talk shows, magazine covers, commercials. The music was making the top 10 list. A new song, Kendrick Lamar was blowing up with it. I mean, it was everywhere. And I mean that in a positive way.
No, definitely. No, I really, honestly, hearing your perspective, Arthur, like I am curious also, like you've been explaining the reaction to it on that side of the world. And in contrast, back home and in the States, one thing that came out of it that I noticed, because the whole time it was happening, at the back of my mind, I was wondering, how long is this going to last? Will it fade like everything else? But one thing that I noticed that I actually do feel stuck was a more appreciation for natural hairstyles in Black people. Because definitely after high school, and especially after the movie, I hadn't seen so many people wear, especially men, wear so many different unique styles of hair. So varied dreadlocks, different kinds of braids and so forth. So I just found that stuck much further beyond the movie. And I obviously feel like it had a big impact beyond just the advertising of it.
Agreed. Go ahead, Keith.
I was going to just chime in to say, I mean, I've also heard some of the criticisms about marketing and all of the promotions, but I think for me, Black Panther will also be connected to where we were in 2018, right? And how we need a moment of joy and celebration, and the idea that this becomes a kind of rallying, this movie becomes a way to rally around, right, Wakanda Forever. For me, I'm okay with that. And again, to bring in my identity as a parent, I have to say, I see so many Elsas for Halloween that I didn't mind all of the white kids who had a Black Panther mask. I'm fine with that. And I think seeing it, there's certainly drawbacks and criticisms that we can make, but seeing it extend throughout different cultures and people interpret it, and all of the think pieces. For this event, I thought it also represented a moment of Black joy that we don't too often see in the media. So
yeah, absolutely. As a parent and to understand that it was a multi-generational experience for most people. One of the few films that you could see with your family and everybody gets something out of it, and not feel like I went to a kid's film with my kid, or it's a great date film. You spoke about the natural hairstyles of where have we seen Black women, African women portrayed in such variety and such beauty and such regalness on the big screen, and not be second bananas. You know, a lot of people, particularly in my family, feel like that, you know, that Chadwick was almost a minor character because Killmonger, you know, Michael B's character took on so much energy, and then compared to the women collectively, that he was even a third as far as where the energy was on the screen and what people were looking at and what they were drawn to and the impact of it. I mean, every magazine spread about them really featured the women, maybe a single picture of Black Panther or T'Challa, but you know, let's talk about the women. The Dora Milaje, you know, the power that continued and reached backwards to the comic book world. I was really impressed when Roxane Gay started writing The World of Wakanda and did the thing that was cut from the actual film. There was a flirting scene between two of the characters in Black Panther that apparently was cut out because they didn't want to introduce this idea of lesbian characters. But Roxane Gay went in full steam ahead and wrote a beautiful series that sold out almost before they even came out. So let's talk about the women in Black Panther, and then we'll move towards Boseman. Assuming you have something to say about the women in Black Panther.
Oh, shoot. Well, you know, it's interesting because I did also feel that, and I think that was even brought up by quite a few critics that, yeah, like Chadwick Boseman character really was, even though it was his film, it was almost like he was the he was like the side character to his own film, you know, and because the women that were in there were just amazing, and they had strong personalities and strong. I mean, obviously Shuri, like, you know, and the Dora Milaje, okay, you know, they just kind of took over the show every time they were on the screen. Like I would even say that they were like better fighters than Black Panther himself. You know, it's like everything they did just stood out. They had great lines, and it is kind of bad that they took out the part with the Dora Milaje being having a relationship amongst themselves, because obviously even in the, I think later we're going to be talking about like Ta-Nehisi Coates series, and that is actually a major plot point within the Nation Under Our Feet. And I think that you know, perhaps just as that was like our first you know, major Black character kind of tentpole film, it was also, you know, Hollywood was still exploring I guess like the LGBT community on the big screen, right, and that type of representation. But it was definitely a chance that Disney could have had, you know, and it would have, and so now, I mean, it's kind of sad because we don't know what would have come from that, you know, just kind of having those characters and having that other you know, interaction happening. But the great thing about Black Panther, and I think that actually makes Black Panther's character and Chadwick Boseman character even stronger of a character. The idea that his character still had, you know, his character was still represented in the strength that he was, and obviously he was still the hero of this film. But that this strong character, this king, could be also supported by this tribe or this gauntlet of just as strong women, you know, without him ever feeling weaker or lower than, and even outside of the film, the cast were just as supportive. Like occasionally, you know, you might hear within Hollywood films like the backroom chatter and stuff, or, oh, like, you know, I need more screen time, or I need, like, you know, something like that, but that never came across from Chadwick Boseman, where so he was totally okay with sharing the screen time, and even in some cases having the female characters have more screen time than him, even though he's the main actor. And so I think that that says a lot for what Black Panther was what Black Panther represented as a whole, and also just the cast and crew and what they were trying to show with just representation in general, with both gender wise and with the nationality, I guess, or race.
Yeah, and I actually really agree with your point, Frank, that you had brought up that all of the women had this air of regality, and it was definitely intentional, because I can't really think of any of the female characters that were made, or maybe not on purpose, but every character was made to look regal, like you had said, even from the very small details like the shells on their clothing that would represent wealth. They made every effort to ensure that the women were represented in a certain way. And I guess it would relate to, it's not just Black representation as a whole, but also how Black women within the film are viewed, and just extending to maybe all reaches of Black representation that maybe hasn't been given the best light in history, or is now being revitalized in a way that encapsulates all of it.
Any other comments regarding the women? You know, one of the things that I was really impressed by is in the movie of how many ways they put, like there was no one singular beauty or type. And if you look at what's considered strength, I mean, Shuri, her character she's a really small person, but it had nothing to do with her ability to fight and to be an equal player and to have, I mean, and she was also the smartest person on the planet at the same time. I mean, what that did for young girls, you know, to be all these things at the same time. What I loved about the T'Challa character losing to Killmonger in that penultimate battle was that, you know, what it kind of changed the how young boys might think about what strength is. You know, Killmonger was physically probably more intimidating and bigger and stronger. And even when he won, he didn't win, you know. There were so many things that went back and forth that, you know, I think you could write papers about this for decades if you really look closely at some of the major themes and challenges. Also heard, you know, some critiques of the film that made me, you know, take a back step. You know, I know a lot of people who are politically savvy took a huge issue with the CIA's role, given the history of Black people around the world looking heroic in this particular movie. Some people went so far as to suggest that it was a Black savior movie with the white man coming in as a CIA person and saving the day, that ruined it, the whole experience for some people because of that one or two scenes. And I had too much good happen for me that would just, I just brushed that off every time I heard it. But you know, I appreciate them seeing the film that way, but I regret that it disallowed them to really enjoy all the other things the film had to offer. Anybody want to comment on that critique of the film?
I was gonna kind of mention with the representation of the women in the film, like the thing that I kind of liked and that stood out to me was it never felt like these characters were like Mary Sue's, or they felt like they're just there to be the perfect women. You know, you didn't get those gratuitous shots of these women doing something overly sexualized or anything like that. So I remember just thinking about that and how they must have really thought about how they want these women to be represented. And in terms of the criticism, I do remember a lot of things people didn't like on my end. They were talking about some of the story elements in terms of pacing. They felt like some of the characters, they felt a little rushed in places. And I can understand that, I can understand that from a writer's perspective where they felt like certain characters, they didn't feel too real. But, much like you said, Frank, where it's, you kind of take the good, and then the little things that kind of aren't perfect, because no movie's perfect anyway. You just kind of go, it could have been worse. So I'm okay with that. I'll take it. And so, yeah, I think I never want any Black entertainment to be void of criticism. Me personally, I feel like, open the floor for criticism, and let's actually have a dialogue about how these characters are represented, and so on. So I'm never shy about talking about the bad, honestly.
I would add, I agree. I think criticism, commentary, all of those things, I would hate for us to think about this movie as being above or beyond the fact that we couldn't really dig in and talk about it. In terms of the CIA or Everett Ross's character, I think one of the interesting bits of information about this is thinking about the source material. So when Panther's Rage came out, which is the story arc on which the film takes a lot of its material, in the 70s, it was a very big deal that the cast had only one white character. It was a different white character, but it was all Black. It was T'Challa and his royal court. It was other people of Wakanda. And the Avengers even didn't make an appearance. And for the writer, Don McGregor, he had to constantly argue behind the scenes because they were like, when are you gonna put some white people in there? When are the Avengers gonna show up? And he, made his case and argued for a vision of Wakanda that said, well, where are the white people supposed to come from? And he also made the case that he wanted T'Challa to not have another white hero come in and save the day. So he fought for that storyline. And so then for me, seeing it in the movie is a nice callback to that. Although I can understand, white savior narratives are also prevalent and subject to criticism. But I think understanding some about the source material also helps us to appreciate what they were trying to do in the film.
Yeah, thank you for that. Any other comments in the area? I know we have a whole slew of questions that are dropping in the chat. I think at some point Craig is gonna lob some of those into us. I'll leave us with one more space to jump in. After Chadwick passed, they already had announced that there will be a Black Panther 2, and Ryan Coogler hadn't written it yet. So I imagine he's somewhere writing of. So we know who won't star in it. Where do you all feel like it should or has to go? Who should come back? Who should be the central star? What storyline is a missed opportunity? What do you expect?
Difficult. That's difficult.
That's really difficult.
Yeah, I have no idea. I can never guess or come up with what I think should be in the film. I'm always just I like to just be surprised by whatever the writers do. But knows.
What do you hope for then?
I just hope that it's a good movie. I have no idea. Okay.
It's a lot of pressure you don't want the sophomore jinx. The first one was so.
Yeah. Because what I don't want is what I guess what I don't want to happen is for the writers to bend to the I don't know I think the writers have to have the freedom to be able to create the story that they need to tell or want to tell. And so I feel like if the audience or the fans was like, you should write this, you see this, and then the writers feel like, okay, well, we need to add in all of the the social commentary that's happening right now, and we need to make sure I feel like it of course we have to be conscious as creators. We have to be conscious of what's happening in the zeitgeist and where we are at the moment. But at the same time, the creators have to be able to tell the story that they want to tell, and so I guess with it's really sad obviously Chadwick passed now, and so it's like, what's going to happen with this story? There's so many things that there's so many directions that the writers can go. I mean, they can there's so many directions. There's so many stories they can tell. You know, obviously they now can't tell a story about Black Panther, or I mean, they could talk about his death, which even in that sense could just be an amazing story. Like, instead of just bringing up a new character, like, okay, now let's just tell Shuri's story. But then if you do that, then it's like, well, what happened to Black Panther? And so, or you can like talk about, you know, some of the other characters like Ao and Adoro Malachi, and maybe that could even be interesting. I just think that trying to figure out where did the first film end, and then how are we going to go from there, and then tell this next story, you know, and what feels right within the, obviously they're telling a story within the MCU universe, so they can't go too far in one direction, then it not connect to any of the rest of the Marvel films and things. So I don't know. I just feel that, like, you know, that there's a lot of possibilities, and I hope they choose one that makes sense.
Yeah, we all wanted to make sense. You know, I think that, you know, there's some pre-existing storylines that they have access to. Obviously, you know, there's a whole, I think millions of people want them to follow the Shuri storyline, you know, when she becomes the Black Panther and assumes the mantle, and T'Challa is in the ancestral realm for some unknown amount of time, which happens frequently over the series of the comic. But, you know, the whole connection to the Avengers and to the Marvel universe, in some ways, is kind of limiting because it can't be totally disconnected. But knowing how they connect things, you know, they'll want to know make decisions about Black Panther 3 before they even finish editing number 2, so they can sell the next one. Yeah. A lot of people were disappointed that they believed Killmonger was dead because they thought he was such a strong character that he deserved to be in the next movie. You know, so the hero is only as strong as the villain. I mean, you need a really good antagonist to make this conflict feel real and be worth investing in a character. So I agree, Arthur. I mean, there's so many directions they can go. And you wonder how much of what's happening now in the world will influence something that hasn't even been written yet, you know, because they have to start hiring people. Some of them are already on contract, and start shooting by the end of 21 for it to stay on pace with when they want to release this particular film. But I think most people who saw it at least 4 times, we don't even care. You know, we're gonna go, right? We're gonna buy at least one ticket. And hope is going to come back again. Kiana, you were about to say something there?
Well, I'm with you. I think we're going to go. We're going to at least buy that one ticket. I was interested in what I read, the possibility that they might pick up Namor in Atlantis and the conflict that Black Panther has with that character. And I think I was more interested in seeing Chadwick Boseman as Black Panther take on that character. So now that, you know, he's passed, I would be interested in something maybe focused more on Shuri or Nakia. But I think, yeah, I'm not sure where they'll go, but we'll be buying at least the one ticket.
Does anybody feel that it would be unethical or just wrong to bring in a new person as Black Panther?
I was actually going to comment on that, actually, because, you know, I'm kind of conflicted. You know, I agree with, I think someone said the writers should be able to write the story with the freedom to do that, because the character, you know, with all respect to Chadwick, the character, you know, is the Black Panther. And so with that, you know, you think, well, it is so unfortunate that he passed, but I feel like people still want more of those stories. And are we demanding that we limit ourselves to those stories, you know, because of the unfortunate event that happened. So, you know, me personally, I know I wouldn't mind as long as it's done tastefully, you know what I mean? As long as you kind of still have that moment of, you know, grace and reverence to, you know, his passing and stuff like that. And me personally, I wouldn't mind.
So Idris Elba as Black Panther would be okay. I see that. I see those faces.
That's a no for me. Hey, Frank, can I ask a
I don't know.
Yes, please, Craig.
All right, so I have a couple questions for the panelists, and then I think my co-host, Dr. Seer Singh, has a couple. She's been checking the chats, and so she'll come in with a couple questions as well. But first of all, you guys were talking about. You made a point about Gay writing about the scene that was cut, and so I'm wondering for the creators, those of you who are creators, how important is, we've talked about representation of Blackness, right? But there, as we know, there are all types of Black experiences. And so for those of you who are creators and whatnot, I'm wondering how important is it for you to represent in that way, right? So if we're looking at differently abled people, if we're looking at gay Black people in comics, is that something that you are working towards in terms of representation, and even more in terms of female characters and our expectations of female characters in comic books? Is that something that you all are sort of working towards specifically?
Yeah, I think with representation in general, as creators, we do have to take like a decided role about it, like, right? And so because it, although I guess it should happen, like, you know, I guess we hope that it would happen organically, but we know that that's just not the case, right? There's so much that happens behind the scenes, or just kind of within our industries, that then determine what stories are, you know, make it to the screen or make it into publishing or whatnot. And so I think that it's our responsibility to try to make sure that that representation happens all the way across the board. So even like, for example, with the commercial that we did with one of our partners, so the main character is a transgender character. We weren't asked to do that. Like, we were only asked to come up with something that had a theme. You know, they gave all the different companies that were taking part in this commercial just a theme. You choose a theme, and then you can do whatever you want it. But then we just decided to just make a transgender character, just because we just thought that that would be interesting, and you know, and it was a challenge for us to see if we can try to create a character that visually represented a transgender character and didn't just look like a female character and it just looked like a male character. But so I feel that as creators, that it is one of our tasks to think about the different stories that can be told, and try our best to tell those stories where when it fits and when we can.
Thank you. Maz,
yeah, it's funny enough. I did a comic called Supernova, and the main character is a young lady by the name of Akia Hepburn. And at the time, I had been writing this character for a year, and I never thought about her sexuality. I just never thought about that at all. But I was writing this particular scene where she was talking to her friend Tammy, and then I just remember it hitting me that oh my God, I never realized that my character was gay. I remember having that moment, and it wasn't something that I thought about. It did happen organically. I remember that happening because in that particular scene, she was supposed to deliver a line about another character that she was attracted to, but it felt forced. I remember saying, this doesn't feel right. The character doesn't feel like she would say that. And so that forced me to look deeper, like, okay, why isn't the character able to say that? And upon looking deeper, I realized, oh, that's why the character wouldn't say that. And I remember at that moment, I started thinking more about how when you decide to create characters, you have to really think about all the possibilities. If you're trying to make the character true to life, and sometimes it can be there in the ether, it could just exist, or sometimes you have to actually think about that. So I just remember that moment, and it was rewarding too, because discovering that character sexuality and what that meant, it made me as a writer able to go places that I wasn't going because I wasn't thinking about it. So I think not only is it important, it's actually beneficial to your writing, because now you get to explore areas that you might not have been, privy to.
Cameron?
Yeah, the word organic is really resonating with me as it relates to this topic, because I'm just thinking about what it would look like to go into a story with the solid intention to make this character gay without considering all of the things around this character that might not so much would have an influence on whether they're gay or not, but would motivate how they respond to certain things like other people and relationships with people that they're close to. So as a creator, I'm just thinking about how important it is to, in this case, being straight myself, I wouldn't have the confidence to write a gay character. And so it would be important for me to observe people and to interact with people and understand, given that I have a very limited scope in this area, what does this look like for you? What is your experience with this? And maybe even being more informed in that way.
Thank you.
That's interesting. I want to just kind of add to what Cameron said, because yeah, and I think I'll kind of just play like devil's advocate of why I think it's difficult for certain things to come across, like, yeah, just naturally or organically, because like what Cameron said, like you have to have, in order to represent a character properly. So we talk about representation, but representation doesn't only happen on, well, it shouldn't only happen on the screen or on the pages. It also has to happen behind the scenes, particularly with writers and things. And so if I'm white and I'm writing a Black character or something, but I know nothing about the Black experience, how can I possibly write an organically Black character that feels real and resonates with Black people? And that goes with gender and everything. And so I think that, of course, Maz is correct that when you write a character, the character should tell us who he or she or they are. We should never be, so the hard thing is for as a writer is for you to take yourself out of your character, because the character should be themselves on the page. And so as you're writing from page to page to page, those characters essentially should be telling you what their motivations are, what's driving them, and how, and the characters that you're writing should be making their own decisions. But I think that, but when you sit down to write something, you still have to have some sort of inkling of what you're about to write. And so I think, like, if you're gonna write, if we need to make sure that characters from the LGBT community or characters from different cultures, Asian cultures, Black cultures, or Latin cultures are represented properly, we should have consultants and we should have writers from those areas also giving input and into how these characters should be and what those characters' experiences are going to be, so that the characters aren't stereotypes of themselves or shells of what they could be.
Okay, awesome. Another question for you, Arthel. I don't want to speak for Maz, but I'm thinking about the Bahamas small community, and I think that there is burgeoning, I guess, group of young artists who are into animation and creation and so on and so forth. But it's a very difficult market, here. And I know you picked up and moved to, Japan to follow your dreams. I'm wondering what type of advice you might have for young folks who are, you know, maybe in the Bahamas and trying to start a career, start a studio maybe in the field? Do you have any, based on your experiences so far, any words of advice for folks?
Um, that's difficult because I guess it would my advice would change depending on who the group was. So for example, if you're asking what would my advice be for college, then I would think that increasing the access to the tools and to the I don't know, the science of art and animation and things within the school's infrastructure and classes and, you know, syllabus and things like that would then help so that when students, if the students have access to this as a major and they have access to, you know, professionals either through Zoom or whatnot, like who can kind of come and participate. Like, of course, that I think then that will make it so that it's a easier, that would start to help the transition so that so that the field, which is small, could become greater. Perhaps if you're asking what would my advice be to students like in high school or like elementary school or something like that, or and what kind of advice would I give them if they kind of were just interested in animation, or if they were interested in some sort of creative field, drawing for comic books or anything. I think my advice would be for them to because they don't have the access there to all the content. Although like now with I'd say that the great thing about 2020 is that everything is accessible on YouTube. So don't be limited by what you physically have access to, because you can there's so much information online, and there are things like this. There are all these panels and you know, where you can kind of join in and watch professionals talk and give advice and teach you about things online. So definitely like maybe expand the way that they think about art in general and education in general. And although I do feel that education is super important. I went to 2 colleges and I feel everybody should go to college, but that's a different conversation. But I do think that it's not the only way to learn something. So prior to getting to college, teach, uh, teaching yourself is super important. Looking for information is important. Going to the library, well, we used to go to libraries, but now I still think you should go to libraries. Books are important, but like, you know, so like looking for information and telling yourself that you have access to a wealth of knowledge and access. If I was to give advice to professionals in the Bahamas who are maybe working at a studio or a small company or something there, or and then wanting to work with larger corporations or you know, expand on what it is that they're doing, I would say that definitely following the, you know, so there's a saying that says you can't like reinvent the wheel, right, and things like that, like particularly if you haven't even, you know, if you haven't even created one yet. So I'd say look at the industry as a whole and what's happening everywhere else, you know, and obviously in the areas where the industry is most prevalent and where it's most forward moving. So in the West, you know, in the States with how they think about animation, 3D and 2D, in Asia and France, and definitely try to connect, and like partnerships, networking is super important. You know, looking for studios that you can get not only get information from, but work with, who might, you know, these studios might be willing to work with you. It happens in Asia a lot, like in Indonesia and Philippines and things, where larger studios like in Japan and things would then partner with smaller ones there and you know, teach them their production method and things. But obviously, like, you know, that's a whole thing. But I'd say, yeah, like perhaps look for studios in partnerships that can help you to build your infrastructure.
Awesome.
Sorry, that's a long answer.
No, that was perfect. Thank you. I have one more question before I turn it over to Dr. Searsing, and this is for the academics, Frank and Kiana. I'm wondering, how do you see the study of comics, graphic novels, like within the last maybe 5-10 years? Have you seen any changes in terms of the interest of students, and maybe even in terms of universities themselves, in terms of how seriously they take the study of comics and graphic novels in terms of creating classes and so on?
Kiana, you go.
Sure. So, I mean, I would say the biggest difference I've seen over my last 15 years or so is that, as I said before, I didn't come into this field studying comics. I came through a different discipline, through English and cultural studies, and then added that on and developed that as part of my area. But I now teach undergraduates and graduate students who are taking entire classes on comics and graphic novels. They're writing dissertations and publishing before they even get their PhD. And so we will now have a generation of new scholars who are able to really specialize in this area. And there's benefits and drawbacks to that. But the biggest change that I see is the ability to be able to develop and specialize this interest early. And there's a whole other arm of this in sort of K through 12 and the way that comics are used there, whether it's YA graphic novels or for literacy purposes. But I think being able to openly specialize and develop this early on is definitely a shift than from what we've seen before. Hopefully it leads to people getting jobs, being able to teach comics though. That's the other piece. That's the harder part.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think that what I consider a litmus test is to look at the number of classic novels that are being recreated as graphic novels. I taught Moby Dick this semester as a graphic novel, which says a lot. You know, I taught Kindred. And, you know, my, you know, sad spot is that there aren't, you know, I want all the Black classics as a graphic novel. So we could teach that Black lit class as a graphic novel and start the kids even earlier. I mean, the response to it from young people who don't consider themselves readers is amazing. I mean, some of these kids go on the weekend and finish a whole novel, and they've never done that. Struggled to finish the book, and they still know the entire story. I think there's some advantages to using the graphic novel as a format in the same way that kids will hope there's a movie version of the book they have to read so they can watch the movie and then pretend to write the paper as if they had read it and they can't get the quotes right.
Yeah.
I think this is even better because you tend to get the actual text. But because of the power of visual storytelling, you know, you get even more, in my opinion. I think that's one of the advantages. The fact that we're both teaching classes at the university level, you know, I don't have any graduate students yet, but I can imagine, I would love to see those syllabi. I think that speaks volumes. But I think, you know, we have to look the other direction and legitimize it even earlier. I mean, the YA market is growing every year, but, you know, I would love for first graders, kindergarten kids to know that in their library, you know, there are comic books and they're legitimate and they just can't, you know, keep them in circulation. I mean, it made a difference for me. I mean, I'm a reader and a writer today because, you know, my initial connection with comic books, you know, and falling in love with stories. And ultimately for me, I don't care what the format is, the thing is only as good as the story. And that's the thing we're trying to sell and share and remember and recreate and talk about and be married to. And I'm always thinking about, well, what's the next generation of that going to look like? You know, we haven't spent a second talking about what Black representation looks like in the gaming industry, video games. That's a whole panel conversation, and some really disturbing stuff is going on. So that's worth talking about. Well, then what happens after that? You know, because I think this whole virtual world we've been forced into for education at every level is going to change the game. And I don't think we'll ever go back to traditional classrooms again for every single class. That there will be a market for people who excel at teaching online. And there'll be students who don't want to take a class any other way. Mm-hmm. You know, I try to find balance between, you know, the print media. Half of the books required for my class are on Kindle, you know, so that young people, you know, they're flipping through this graphic novel with their fingers, and it's in this format, so it works for them. And at the same time, they're also have one that flipping, and I make them talk about the difference and what they prefer. And I'm hoping that the printed book is still gonna have, you know, 'cause I'm just that old. That I want that paper to still be real. You know, when all the power's gone, you know, and you have some sunlight, you can still read a book. But right. Unplug all the batteries, you know, then what? The civilization collapse. But I'll stop there because I tend to run on too long. So Craig, go ahead.
All right, cool, thank you. So now, you know, during the last hour or so, folks have been asking questions in the chat. So I'll call on my co-host, Dr. Seer Singh, to read out some of the questions that some of our listeners have had.
Okay, good evening, everyone.
Evening.
Yeah, fantastic panel. Well, there are several questions, some of which have been addressed, but I'll see how I can, you know, deliver them. The first one by Saskia: would you say that the younger generation are less interested in reading, and thus animation has become the sort of substitute, has become exceedingly more popular? Well, Arthel has started to address that when he talks about the ways in which we need to expand how we think about art, how we think about education. And Frank, you yourself, you know, have talked about the graphic novel. It's very interested to hear that, because there are colleagues of ours at the University of the West Indies who are doing the same thing, you know, classics in graphic novel form being taught in the classes now. That's really, really intriguing for me. To what extent do you think, just to, you know, play on Saskia's question, what do you think? Is it that the younger generation are less interested in reading and this visual dimension sort of engages them more? How does that tie into all the other ways in which they are required to write academically in the other courses that they take? How do you think this factors in, let's say, in a literary class, using the graphic novel sort of to help them make that lead transition and to have an appreciation for that form and modality itself?
I'll go first. You know, I think for me, I've never been satisfied with the level of literacy for incoming freshmen. I don't think my students are reading less. I just think reading has never been that popular among young people. And now with so many more social media opportunities, it has the potential to become less so, and worse because of how the communication is happening. The writing is also suffering. You know, I've gotten papers that read like two people are texting each other, but it wasn't intended to be in a text format. That's just how they talk. So I think, you know, at the same time we teach courses called Word, you know, where, you know, they have to intentionally write something that sounds like a text so that they understand that that's what that is. And then write something that doesn't sound like a text so they understand the difference, to kind of move them out of that space, that writing at multiple levels. But I think young people are writing. I think you can't ever take out the importance of education that needs to happen because of what English professors can offer in the classroom. You know, how to interpret what you read, how to write it, you know, what the difference is between multiple genres. And while they're all important to what you're trying to tell, but also I think there's an obligation to put in front of young people reading material that they're interested in. You know, I have young poets all the time who believe they hate poetry or hated poetry because all they ever had a chance to study was Shakespeare, and they found nothing in common about the material in a Shakespearean novel or Shakespeare's poetry with their own lives. So I'm always looking for that opportunity to, you know, to give them Miles Morales, who's Black and Puerto Rican, and a Spider-Man, you know, and that you have a brand new audience, you know, Ms. Marvel, Pakistani American young woman, superhero, you know, that's a whole new audience. You know, I remember when Thor was rewritten as a woman and all the fanboys went crazy, you know, you can't do this. But it created a brand new audience. And I think, you know, everybody wants to see themselves represented on the page and the screen. And the challenge is in all those classes, it's not that the format might be a graphic novel, is that the subject is about them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a really great answer, and I'll just kind of add a little bit to it. I totally agree. It's interesting because like obviously making anime, and I don't think that only anime is the reason why people aren't reading anymore. Like, I think just visual mediums in general, right, like Netflix and all these other streaming services, it seems that our society has kind of become impatient with things, right? So and not I don't know, part of it is just because of how fast-paced society has become. Like everybody needs things right away. So of course it takes longer to digest a book and to get the information. So if you only have, you know, I don't know, 10 minutes of free time or 2 minutes of free time, it's easier to watch Netflix than it is to kind of read a 400-page novel or something, or a book. But I think that, I think it's important for society to not, I don't want to say like, because I don't want this to come off negative. Like I feel that, but I don't know, I don't have a better term, but I don't think that we should dumb down education for the current situation. Like, so I feel that like, you know, reading is important, writing is important. It always has been since the beginning of, you know, of civilization. And so like now, just because we've gotten to a point where now we have TVs that we don't need to read anymore, I think that that's backwards, you know, thinking. And so even for, you know, for my son, and maybe we hear it all the time with, you know, Bill Gates and his children, and, you know, you limit the time that they have access to technology and things like that, because there are things that are just as important. And so I think that, you know, so even on my desk, like for my son, you know, I make it a point for him to see me actually reading a book, and you know, before he even turns on, you know, so obviously he's only 1 year old, and he wants to look at YouTube or whatever to watch Cocomelon or something. And so he's always, as soon as he comes to my office and sits on my lap, he points to the monitor, like, you know, like, I want to watch Cocomelon. He can't talk yet, but that's what he wants to see. But what I tell him is, I'm like, no, you know, you're supposed to play with your toys first, and you have to read first. Like, get your book. And so then he'll get off my lap, and even though he's only one and he can't talk, but he'll get off my lap, and he'll go grab his book, you know, and he has many that are just all over the place. And this is even my office. So at our house, we have even more. And so I feel that it's the obligation of our educational system and for parents, and to still instill the importance of reading and the importance of writing correctly and speaking correctly, and to not kind of fall into the idea that, well, you know, young youth doesn't do that now, so we shouldn't be teaching, or like, you know, we often open up a book or like go online now, and they're like, oh, there's too much homework for kids, or there's too much school time. Like, kids should only be in school for 3 hours now. Whereas like I feel like it's so weird. It's almost like it's like next we're gonna hear that education is not important anymore. We should just have TV. So I'm like kind of rambling, but I feel that the importance of education, importance of reading and things like that should always be first and foremost, no matter where we are in society, because that, you know, intelligence and learning is the reason why we're even where we are. So yeah, that's kind of what I was saying about that.
Thank you. And most of the repositories exist in that modality, in that form, you know, reading in the traditional way. But yeah, I take your point very well, Arthur, that, you know, the whole idea of the university, when you're asked the question, how might we expand, or what advice would you give to somebody in this particular location in the Bahamas? And you mentioned, you know, perhaps even bringing on stream in the creative arts department, something like, you know, the creation of the graphic novel, that kind of thing. So yeah, it becomes expanded and so expansive in terms of what somebody can aspire to in that sphere, in that field. Okay, so there are several other questions that have been touched upon. Dylan asked this question: what is a good Black Panther story from the comics? And, you know, like another question kind of associated with that was, did you find it problematic that in Black Panther, the narrative conveyed warring among two Black men? Was that problematic? Was that a far stretch from a sort of Pan-Africanist kind of orientation toward, you know, what other narrative might have been delivered in that kind of production? Was that problematic, that there are two Black men warring rather than, you know?
To be honest, I actually found that was one of the more interesting things about the film when I was watching it, was to see that contrast, because it wasn't just about two Black men in isolation. It was a clash of two different ways of thinking and ways of living. And you even saw it when Chadwick Boseman and Michael B. Jordan were on screen. They had the different accents. Killmonger had the more American accent, and he had the African accent. And I just found that dynamic to be very interesting, because it's one thing to just portray two Black men, maybe within the same circumstances, fighting for maybe arbitrary reasons and using that as a reason to criticize. But it just shows that there's a much bigger perspective to maybe be explored by the fact that you have two people who share similar features and maybe experiences, but look at the world totally differently from where they are located.
Right, yeah. Completely different worldviews, ideological positionings. Yeah, so quite understandably so. So to get back to Dylan's question then, what story might Black Panther accommodate? What story might Black Panther comfortably inhabit? You know, I don't know exactly. I hope I'm representing your question. What is a good Black Panther story for the comics, is how he put it.
Oh, I can offer one
Sure.
of my favorites. I mean, I've already mentioned the story arc that the movie's based on is from Jungle Action, featuring Black Panther, which again came out in the early 70s. But I think most people, even if you've not read any of the other comics, really enjoy Christopher Priest's run of Black Panther, which has now been collected into a few volumes, and you can get it online at Comixology and Kindle as well. And he really brought some sharp writing and satire to the series, and this new sort of view of T'Challa as being a lot cooler than he was in some of the previous Avengers comics. He also is the writer who, along with the artist, introduced Everett Ross, the Dora Milaje, and Zuri. So again, a lot of the fundamental elements of the movie were really brought to life by Christopher Priest. So I would, if you don't read any others, maybe start there. Coates is good too, but I really like the Christopher Priest run.
Yeah. And I would agree with that in that order too. Also highly recommend Reginald Hudlin's series. These are all it's a whole series combined into a single book. Ta-Nehisi Coates did an amazing job as well. But I think you'll be able to read the difference between what Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were putting out in the very beginning. Because there's an issue that we almost touched on that's really about authenticity. And if it feels, because when I think about authenticity, I think about the language in an early Luke Cage and him speaking jive of, I was always so insulted by that. I'm like, this is not how Black people talk, but it's how those writers thought Black people thought. You know, they had reduced us to stereotypes. So whatever you're writing, especially if you want to create authentic characters, you know, what Arthel said, it's not just about the character, the writers, the artists, the editors, those people also should be reflected in that same space. If they've been left out and you want to bring them in, you want to be authentic. It's almost what happened to Black people in the beginning. I mean, most people don't know that when the Black Panther first appeared in print and comics, he appeared in a half mask. And readers, white readers, saw that he was Black and had a negative reaction to it. They made a decision, they thought about it, but they ultimately decided to cover his entire face so that white writers initially wouldn't be turned off because they saw he was Black. I mean, so the racism is present, you know, so you're gonna see the sexism, the ageism, and all the isms, they've shown up. And so the challenge is, you know, what have we learned as Black creators and creatives and scholars who study this that we could teach other people going forward, you know. We're Native American comics, you know. Where's Native American hip hop? Is there such a thing? Should there be? I don't think it's enough just to solve our own challenges and dilemmas. You know, let's do what we have always done. Let's lead in this industry too.
Thank you. And another question from Drew. How do panelists feel about the boom in webcomics as compared to traditional comic shops? Question is, do you feel that the quality has changed, or do you think that the industry norms have changed in this regard?
I think there are a whole generation of people who prefer it because they were born and there was already internet in their house. But I think there are people from my generation who, you know, my first comics were purchased when there were no comic book stores. You know, my comics were purchased in convenience stores behind traditional magazines, and you had to hunt for them. So I think it has as much to do with technology. I mean, they said that books were going to be obsolete because of technology, but you know, bookstores went out of business behind that idea. But now they're making a resurgence. The independent bookstores are coming back because people have circled back around to needing and wanting to hold, you know, the most ideal thing in the world, you know, in your hand, which is a book. But I think I've been bouncing back and forth. I still prefer the paper, but I'm an old man. Ask somebody young like Cameron, you know, what he prefers. It's probably different.
So I actually do really enjoy still reading paper comics. Lately, as I move more often, I'm finding that it's difficult to carry them always around. So I do find having it as webcomics is more accessible. And in terms of the quality, I would say that it's a mixture between it, you know, maintaining that level of quality and maybe even improving, because there's so much more access to, with the painting softwares, there's so many different possibilities that make getting the same level of quality from traditional comics all the more easier. But at the same time, on the flip side, it's more accessible to anybody. So it's not to say that it takes a lot of years of skill to make something that could still be put out there. So, but I think overall, it's actually expanding the way and the ability of people to read comics more often and just exposing them much more. So I think it's a great thing, honestly.
Okay, we just have a couple more questions. This second to last one, Profit by Matthew. What are your views on Beyonce being added to the cast of Black Panther? Will it take away from the story, detract from it? Will it add to the plot in any way?
Is that real? I for some reason I thought that was like that didn't really happen. I thought it was just kind of
Which or a news story? Where's this coming from? I agree.
Yeah, I heard that was a rumor. I don't think that's been
yeah. I think it's just a
confirmed.
rumor, or like it. Yeah, I think it was just they were just throwing out names and of just famous black people and just like of course Queen Bey. She's always got to make a presence anywhere. So I don't actually think she is part of the Black Panther cast. But I guess to answer the question, like if she was if she was a part of the Black Panther cast, um, yeah, I feel that sometimes taking people who aren't part of a
Ethos.
yeah the ethos or the street like and then just kind of throwing them in isn't always a good thing. Like I don't know like Beyonce, she has she's such a well-known personality that it could also take away from it just because when she's on the screen, like I just feel like you're just always going to think of Beyonce as opposed to whatever character she's supposed to be embodying. Now that doesn't like of course like there's a lot of great actors who also have a strong presence and when they get in they can embody the character, but then that means that they're like master actors right there. And so without calling like I don't want to say that
Yeah,
Beyonce's not a good actress, but like I mean that takes a certain level of skill to kind of be able to take like to put on this new persona and then have the audience view just that so I don't know. So I when I first read the news I was just like, oh my god, why is Beyonce going to be, there's so many other actors who can be Storm. And I guess I also thought with the whole colorism thing that I don't know. I felt like Storm should just be darker. She's from Africa, right? Like, why are they choosing? Like, of course, Beyonce represents blackness and all that, and I think like so not to take that away from who she is as a person, but like representation matters, and I feel that there's an opportunity to choose a beautiful dark black woman to represent Storm, and so that was just kind of what I thought about.
Okay. Anyone else wants to comment?
yeah. It seems to me that the of when the actors are lesser known, it seems easier to create a more convincing role, unless you are a master actor. I mean, Chadwick was Thurgood Marshall. He was James Brown. He was Jackie Robinson. He was King T'Challa. And in every one of those roles, he was that character, but it has as much to do with how hard he trained to be able to do that. In the same way that when I watched Spike Lee's Malcolm X movie, seeing Spike on the screen kind of ruined it for me in that moment because I could not get past, that's Mars Blackman in Malcolm X. It's not working for me. So I think it would be distracting for me as a purist. That would be the critique on that particular point. But I agree. I mean, I think the representation matters. There are some people who are ideally suited for that particular role. And, this is all international. Why are we still shopping in Hollywood for people to fill roles like this? It's going to be an international success. Let's go to the continent. Let's find, the hottest actress in South Africa or Nigeria, and be as authentic as possible. We don't have to sacrifice the quality. We don't have to have a distraction. We really want this movie to sell. But there probably somebody sitting in a boardroom saying, Beyonce, anywhere in there, like the Lion King, will sell more tickets. And ultimately, they own the product and they're trying to sell tickets. They want to make as many millions or $1 billion as they did last time. So it could happen, but I just hope it's in a row that, maybe they're in a nightclub scene and she's a singer. That would.
I'm kind of interested in what does Kiana think about that.
I was going to ask Kiana. Any comments?
About Beyonce, I don't. I don't have any. I really,
Someone already answered. She said, that's a rumor.
yeah.
I think she answered.
Okay, that's a loud monosyllabic no. Okay, final question then. And this is from Tapia Hall. As creatives, how has Black Panther movie inspired you to dream bigger in terms of what you can do in this field?
I'd say I'd want to touch on that because it was really, I would say Black Panther is one of those movies that showed me that, again, there's more ways to present something than you would initially think. And I guess as it relates to culture, and even as I think about Bahamian culture, I know growing up, it was a case where I wasn't sure how to portray this in a way that would be interesting to me. So I always leaned on things that I had seen already that I knew worked. But in the case of seeing what Black Panther is able to do by incorporating all these elements that are familiar to the people in those places, it's really inspired me to think, you know what, there are ways that I could portray Bahamian culture that, you know, is interesting and can resonate with people while still standing on a global scale. So I'd say it definitely made me think more about how I'm just creating the worlds and the characters in my stories.
Thank you. Any other panelists?
I think like what I got from like once Black Panther was you know when it became a thing and then it became a box office success, a world box office success. I think what I got from that was that, you know, this type of content can exist and people will watch it, and it's kind of similar to like when, like, you know, Obama became the first Black president, you know, with flaws aside and things like that. But just the idea that, you know, that I always felt that the first of anything opens doors for others. And so just as Black Panther, when Black Panther came out, now we have like Lovecraft Country. We have all these other great Black shows that are like kind of becoming accessible, like with Watchmen and everything. And so I felt that, so I don't know if it gave me direct inspiration to create something similar within that vein, but what I did feel from it was that, oh, like many opportunities are going to be born from it, and then it's a great thing.
Okay, Craig. Thank you very much for your responses. And back to you, Craig.
All right, thank you, Marie. All right, so we're just at about the 2-hour mark. So I think it's time for us to close up. What I would like to do before we end, though, is to give the panelists one last chance, maybe a minute or two to wrap up. Any thoughts you have, any final words you want to share with us in terms of the ideas presented in the panel, representation of Blackness in comics, graphic novels, on the page or on the screen, and also behind the scenes as well, and in academia as well. Any ideas, thoughts, final words?
I'll go. This is directed to young creatives who are looking for a niche market, looking to put their own brand out there. I would hope that some of you will take on the challenge of recreating all the amazing Black classical literature that we have as graphic novels. I think it would just increase literacy worldwide. And I can imagine it, even as in a digital format, how quickly it will be consumed, because we don't have to invent great stories. We have them. We have had them for centuries, and I would love to see them, see their legacies extend and be extended in the graphic novel genre as well.
Thank you.
And this is the best Zoom I've ever been part of.
Awesome. Cameron, any last words for us?
Honestly, I've just really had a lot of fun just discussing this topic, and even just thinking about, my own perspectives and just hearing everyone else's. Honestly, I think one thing that I just find really surprising is the academic part that Frank and Kiana, that you two are talking about. Just because I guess one thing about graphic novels is I've always been conflicted whether it had a place in academia, because I've always heard people say that the images take away from the words, and because of that, it's not worth it as a medium. But just being able to see how, you know, how much of a gateway it can be for people just gives me a lot of hope for animation as well. And maybe to say that, what, the lack of words and images will also not take away from the possibility of the two connecting as well. And animation won't just be a way of distracting people, but also to help them to think bigger as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Maz, are you around?
Yeah, I had to switch over because my phone died. But yeah, I kind of just want to say thank you for, making me a part of this. It is very encouraging to see so many talented people kind of have the same thoughts about something that is very important. And I just want to say to anyone who's listening, in terms of representation, I think it is one of the most important things that we can do as people, because they are stories, and those stories are based on people, and those people are real. And I feel like psychologically, a lot of things happen behind the scenes, whether we're aware of it or not. And it's always important to have those things presented in different mediums. So I would encourage anyone who's either a writer, comic book artist, animator, who happens to be a person of color, to explore that, and be true to yourself. And one thing, especially coming from the Bahamas, I would say we have to learn to put ego aside. I find that that's always a limiting thing when you have a small industry in a country like ours, and learn to work with each other and get ideas from each other and kind of move forward. So that would be my last thing, is just really learn to work with each other, and you could learn and gain things from, you know, anyone really, if you're willing to listen.
Awesome. Thank you. Arthel, final words?
Um, Final words. I was talking a lot, so I have nothing to say. I think thank you all for just having me here for this. I hope that I was, in I don't know, in some way helpful, and was able to add to this discussion. And yeah, thank you. That's all I'll say about that.
Awesome. Thank you. And Kiana?
So I want to thank you all as well. It's been terrific to be a part of this conversation. I think one thing that I always like to say about Black Panther that I didn't get a chance to touch on is the fact that I mentioned earlier that story arc, Panther's Rage, comes from the title of the comic that it comes from is Jungle Action featuring the Black Panther. It was what's considered a jungle comic, which way back when in the 50s, 60s, 70s was a comic that often featured very racist, sexist, imperialist stories that we would all on this call find very problematic and disturbing to read today. And to me, what's terrific about Black Panther is that Marvel made a choice to replace those stories with this other kind of jungle comics. Black Panther comes out of that tradition, but they did something different with that character. They built that world of Wakanda. The artists and the writers who were hired to work on it built something creative and innovative and really wonderful out of it. And as we get closer to 2020, more of the writers who worked on that title were African American, were women, and they added to it and changed it and developed that character. and all of the people of Wakanda into what we saw on the screen. And so for me, part of the really wonderful thing about Black Panther, and it's so nice to be talking to creatives as well, is the way that Black culture can take these things that sometimes really bother us and turn them into these other amazing stories. So that's one of the things that I really love about Black Panther, and that I wanted to make sure I mention at the end of this. And thank you again for inviting me here.
Awesome.
Thanks, Greg.
All right. So I want to, before we leave, I just want to thank our panelists. Thank you all so much. I reached out to you on a wing and a prayer, hoping that you guys would agree to be a part of this conversation, because the committee, Blue Flamingo Literary Festival Committee, just felt like it was timely, you know, and I think based on our conversation this evening, we heard how many awesome things are happening and how important this field of study is in terms of entertainment, but also in terms of academia as well. And so I'm glad we had a chance to talk. We had up to 200 people on at one point. So this was our largest event so far. And I would definitely like to invite you guys to keep in touch. You know, the Blue Flamingo Literary Festival, our main festival, is usually in March, and we host workshops and other talks and so on. And so hopefully we can call on you guys again to be a part of another event where we continue this dialogue, or maybe, you know, veer off on a different subject matter within the field of graphics and comics and so on. So, and Frank, hopefully we can get your collection down at the University of the Bahamas at some point in the future when we can move about.
Sounds good to me.
Awesome. So everyone, thank you all so much for joining in. Everyone who stayed the course, who were here for the entire time, thank you for participating, for listening, for asking your questions, for being a part of the chat. And I would invite everyone back on November 20th. We will have quite a few international poets who will be presenting here as well. And so please keep an eye out for that. Frank, I know you and your beautiful wife are also poets as well. So hopefully you guys will chime in and be a part of that talk as well. So thank you all very much for being here, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Arthel, you enjoy the rest of your day. I know your day is just starting. So have a good one, and thank you all very much.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
It's nice seeing you guys.
Oh.